Welcome back to the Business Immigration Benchmark. Today's a special episode, and with me, I have a very special guest, Minnie Truong, a 7-year global and immigration mobility veteran, a few of which we worked together. And dare I say, I call Minnie a dear friend. So, welcome, Minnie, to the Business Immigration Benchmark. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in the global and immigration mobility space?
Hi, Laura, and hi, audience of Laura's podcast. it's it was a surprise invitation to Laura's podcast because Laura actually used to be my manager at our previous law firm, and it's great to always have a mentor, even though we no longer work at the same place anymore. My name is Minnie Truong. I'm currently an immigration specialist at ISN Software, based in Dallas, Texas. Cannot believe that it's almost 7 years in immigration. I started professionally at an NGO, International Rescue Committee in Dallas, for a year, and then I moved on to Barry Appleman and Leiden in Dallas, where I meet Laura. And I was there for almost 4 years before I moved to ISN, my current job right now. So pretty much a lot of my day-to-day work is all about visas, and global mobility is something new that I'm still learning in my daily job. So looking forward to share my experience with everyone in the audience, and also looking forward to hear what kind of questions you might want to ask me.
Well, we'll be looking for your insights into, transitioning from a corporate immigration law firm, transitioning into in-house work and what you've learned, what skills you gained from the law firm that you use and leverage in your in-house role. And then we also want to pick your brain for, in-house communication best practices. So our ideal audience members are folks like you, immigration specialists, or folks that want to get into in-house work. So I think, we want to understand what your career progression looks like, lessons learned, and then, what you're taking away from lessons learned in managing a corporate immigration program on the inside. So I know I give a lot of my take on what I think immigration specialists need to know, but you're the expert, you're the one doing it day to day. So kind of what your communication best practices are, because no matter how great your program is, if you're not communicating it effectively, it kind of doesn't matter what benefits you're offering, right? So with that, I think I'll dive into our first question, which is, congrats on almost, I think it's 2 years with ISN this month.
Yes, I think
Excellent.
that next week is my anniversary.
Okay, well, we'll be sending you the cake, or maybe ISN will. Who knows?
I'll be waiting for it.
Yeah, what's your favorite flavor? Can you tell us about, how you went from the service provider or the law firm to in-house? Like, what was that process like? What made you want to pursue an in-house specialist role?
Yeah, it was. So right now it's 2024, and I'm in my role for 2 years. So that means I started looking into other options a little after COVID. I wouldn't say that COVID was like the driver of why I was looking for a new job, but it was the environment back then. It was everybody was trying to play safe and trying to stay where they should be. And everybody is either happy to have a job because there was a lot of layoffs during COVID, or they just do the bare minimum to survive. But during that time, for me, I just talked to myself, and I think that there is no universe where I get to be rewarded for doing the bare minimum. And so if I want to really push myself, I need to explore other options in immigration. And that's when I started to put myself out there, update my LinkedIn, and like professionally polish my profile. And fun fact, the current job that I got now, I did not actually apply for it in the beginning. It was a recruiter that reached out to me and found my LinkedIn. And so that's how I got to my current place.
Interesting. Was it an industry recruiter, like within the global mobility space, or like within the tech space, or what kind of recruiter?
The recruiter that reached out to me was a technical recruiter. So my
Okay.
role is something that she doesn't recruit often. I
Okay.
guess it's just a very random match.
Fantastic. Are these skills or lessons that you use on a daily basis or leverage from the law firm days in your immigration specialist role in-house?
Yeah, definitely understanding how a case cycle works is very helpful in helping everyone who needs to be involved understand what should happen next. When I moved on to the in-house side, I realized that there's a lot of disconnection between all parties. From the law firm side, like I always understand that there's always the legal team and the HR and then the employee, the three main parties that are supposed to work together to complete a case from beginning to end, right? But when I move into the in-house side, I realized that a lot of the focus on the HR side is just how do we communicate with the council, and then we will translate it back to the employee. There's a lot of disconnection because the employee oftentimes do not have the direct conversation with the council. And there could be, policy reason and, some strategy behind it why they don't want the employee to connect directly without permission. But there's a lot of disconnection there. And, the HR person oftentimes is not the best expert in immigration. And the employee oftentimes they are the experts in whatever they can Google. And then from the council side, obviously we know everything and we can give them all the options. But in the end of the day, the strategy has to be approved by the employer. So all parties should have been more involved in the conversation with each other. But it was lacking a lot in the in-house side if, the team is new.
Do you feel like you're connecting or translating or mediating those conversations? Like you're describing a lot of disconnection. And so when you're stepping into this role as the in-house immigration specialist, do you feel like you're putting the pieces together for all parties?
Definitely. Definitely.
And can you give an example of like how you're doing it? Like I'm kind of curious to know like where common breakdowns occur. Is it like in the green card sponsorship? And if so, where? Or is it in like H-1B transfer and with the recruiter? Like, can you paint us a picture of where you put it together and make the connections for the teams?
Yeah, I think I can use the green card process as the example because that is often the more complex process, but everyone will ask for it. So oftentimes, the company will have an internal policy on when they will begin the process. And the council knows that, okay, based on this job position, we can do it. This is a good timeline before the H-1B max out, for example. But the employee themselves, oftentimes, they don't know anything about the process. And many of them that I know do not even know that there's going to be an issue the moment they max out, and they don't know that they should have asked for this sponsorship 1 or 2 years in advance. So there was a lot of disconnection in terms of knowledge sharing on when we should start the process. And if we don't do it by that timeline, what would be the risks? So I think that because I work on the vendor side, I understand that I could see through the future basically, and then see that this is going to happen if we don't begin the sponsorship process now. And 2 years down the road, this employee is going to experience delays in the process. And then HR, the employer side, will have to determine whether to put them on leave or um, transferring them to another entity, for example. So there's a lot more consequences that may happen if we don't know how to trigger the sponsorship on time.
So it sounds like, the substantive knowledge you have of the legal processes, because you're incredibly strong paralegal when we work together. And obviously you're still describing a very strong legal background, and that you can translate that into like the business need or like the business impacts in a way that maybe is hard for a vendor team to reach the right stakeholders. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of the times when we do a permanent residence case, for example, there's the first stage, as you know, is the pre-language, for example, right? And we often have to do a job summary or basically a briefing of the job position that we will do the sponsorship for. And the usual request is the manager, please review this and approve it. But on the in-house side, the manager of the employee that we are sponsoring, oftentimes they are not experts in one, drafting a job description, and two, anything that immigration needs. So on my end, the best way to do this is just skip the manager, and it's saves more time to better educate the HR team or the immigration team in understanding what to look out for in reviewing these job descriptions, and also put more effort into educating the employee into understanding what the options are, options that they can Google and options that they will Google and know that that is not correct.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm seeing more and more HR teams sort of become focused in supporting the green card sponsorship or the immigration space, as opposed to, I think in the past, we involved a lot of the individual managers. And to your point, I think it's more cumbersome. And I think the manager, is at capacity, may not have the bandwidth. And to your point, like, doesn't have the expertise for the HR side of like, what should a job description look like for our company? And then the immigration piece is another. So there are very few managers out there that have such a high volume sponsorship that they can become experts or learn both under a tight time frame, because we want to be moving through these pieces very quickly. So what we've seen when we work with managers, and I'm sure you do too, is they put it on the back burner until someone like pokes them, hey, you got to do this. And they may be reluctant to do it, even though they want to support the employee. It's just low on their to-do list, both because it's hard and it's not something they see every day.
Exactly.
Moving on, kind of in the sort of career advice lane here, what advice or guidance would you give yourself when you were just starting in the immigration field about 7 years ago?
This is a very tricky question. I have to like really do an intro perspective to think of an answer for this one. How about just getting started in immigration in general? I guess based on my voice, you can hear that I'm not originally from the United States, but now I'm doing all the immigration work, which is ironic. I still remember that the first time I traveled to US and I go through the customs line showing all of my documents, and the customs officer asked me what my plan was now that I'm here in America. I said that, yeah, I'm going to my high school tomorrow. It's like 20 minutes away from where I live. I was 17 back then, so like keeping all the answers really brief and short. And I remember that his response back to me is, a lot of girls your age says that they come to America to study, but they don't. And to me, that was kind of a wake up call that it it could be offensive.
Totally.
Immigration interactions can be very offensive, and that could happen to anyone. Whenever I think about that, I just wish that I wish it's like, as long as there is one person who try to be nice and do their best and help me with my immigration experience, then I think that that would really make it less scary and offensive. So now that I'm working in the same industry, I think that my North Node for the entire experience is just try to be a nice person.
Totally.
You don't have to know a lot. You will know a lot as long as you want to help people. But just try to be nice first. And as long as there is one nice person in the entire process, then that could make the entire experience a lot better.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing your story. And yeah, to your point, that interaction with the officer, I would have read offensively too. Hard not to. And that to your point, like, having empathy, being a good listener, being kind through the process, I think has the biggest impact on clients, whether your client is a company or your sort of internal clients like you're describing. Wow, ISN must be really proud to have you there. I know it was always wonderful working with you because you're so empathetic in your communications of, first acknowledging. Most of communication is a lot of people expressing feelings and acknowledging like, wow, sorry, that's so stressful, or the timeline is stressful, or your border experience was, unpleasant. Acknowledging those things because we're humans dealing with other humans, trying to live a happy life. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
It really changes the life quality based on the people who you surround yourself with and also the people who you work with as well. So I think that it's, one of the advice you need to begin a career in any industry is just try to one be positive about your interaction with people around you first and then just be willing to learn.
yeah. No one starts as an expert. You gotta
Yeah.
ask a lot of good questions, and then if you do it kindly, people will be willing to teach you. Yeah, yeah. As an in-house immigration specialist, what are some of your go-to resources as, the dynamic space and immigration and global mobility changes day to day? Are you relying on any conferences, webcasts for staying up to date on information?
Definitely for the US immigration side, I know a lot of resources because I used to be on the law firm side. So what I do is the first day when I moved to the new job is I would go back to all the law firms that I know and then subscribe to their newsletters. And I still receive a ton of like emails about the same thing every day in my inbox. But those are very helpful, to just read through even the headlines and at least I know that there's some changes that needs my attention in the industry. Besides that, there's also ILA conference every year, and
Oh, that's
um,
right. You said you went
yeah,
last year. Yeah.
yes, I did attend it this year as well, but virtually instead of going there in person.
Okay.
But that is also a really great resource to educate myself and also to receive all the materials from the conference that about topics that I possibly did not know of, but now I'm aware of them and I could use them whenever I need. And then for other immigration outside the US, then I would rely a lot on the vendors. So for our company, we have a global presence in other countries as well. And I'm not familiar with, any other
Right. Yeah.
countries outside the US before I moved to my current company. So I rely a lot on them to educate me on what the process would look like in the UK, for example, in Canada, territories that I'm not as familiar with as. And it's very helpful to receive that training directly from a counselor who is more familiar with that. And because I already have the background with US immigration, it just makes it a lot easier to learn what immigration looks like in other countries. And I see a lot of similar things that other countries are doing. And also make me realize that a lot of the processes in the US are not as digitalized and modernized
Yeah.
as I would like.
Yeah.
I think that's the common feedback. But the more I get to learn and observe about other countries, it's always interesting to see how I can proactively wait for US regulations to grow in that same way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I feel like global more and more is growing and that I'm seeing more programs expand globally, especially in light of low lottery selection rates or, stagnant lottery selection rates where companies are looking for international options that are often more easy to navigate and can be premium processed and are digital. So, in a certain sense, some global options end up becoming easier and less expensive than the US, and it becomes kind of like a no brainer for the companies to explore. Are you finding certain jurisdictions more amenable for your company that you're relying on more and more these days, or at the same rates?
It depends on the volume. The majority of our workforce is still US based.
Gotcha.
So a lot of focus is still for US immigration. For outside, I would say that maybe Canada is very easy compared to the US.
Yeah.
And in Europe in general as well. I think that the surprising thing that I learned is Australian immigration. You have to provide a police clearance, and it must be from the FBI. And it was more intensive than I expected. And that process alone could take a much longer time than we anticipated in the beginning before we sent people there.
Fair.
So,
Yeah.
at least in the US, you don't have to get a police clearance for most cases. So
Interesting.
at least something that the US has better and make it simpler compared to Australia.
Nice. We'll have to do it. We'll bring you in when we have Audrey to talk about your global experience. But changing gears a little bit, wanting to talk more about your perspective of program management and specifically effective communication as you're managing a program from the inside. What are some priorities you are focused on in supporting your program this year? Any big picture items?
So for this year, there's a lot of discussions around budgets and timeline.
Yeah.
And budget is on everyone's mind because of how USAS increases the fees by a lot. And now I have to explain, why are we paying $600 for asylum, even though we
Totally.
don't really have.
You're not applying
Yeah.
for asylum.
So
Yeah.
it's just an industry standard that now we have to talk about why we pay that fee and then what we should do to budget for next year. So that's a focus for this year for a lot of companies. I'm sure that my company is not the only one. And another thing is timeline or expiration monitoring and tracking. So before our tracking progress, we have some tracking system, but it's not as comprehensive as what we have now after I started. So now the focus for this year for us is to better track expirations. And the reason behind why we're doing it in a more intensive way is because one, there's a much higher demand for H1B lottery sponsorship.
Right.
And we want to make sure that the F1's people they make it before they expire. And two is we have several people who have never had an I-140 approval before. And these people will face the risk of an H1B max out. And with the extensively long perm process,
Totally.
who knows who knows when they will have the I-140 in hand. So it's also another priority for us to make sure that we track the timeline, and we basically have to ensure that we know everyone's profile and immediately make a decision based on the budget that we have.
Yeah.
And based on the timeline that the employee has.
Are you doing any budget projections when you're kicking off a green card sponsorship? Are you seeing stakeholders want to know, okay, what do we expect the lifetime spend on this employee is when we kick off a green card?
That's the direction that we will want to do, but for now, it's more of an overall budget for the entire program.
Okay.
And if there is any one-off decisions that, for a new hire that we want to make an offer to, for example, but we need to consider the budget because they have maybe some pink flags on their transfer, for example, then we'll have to consider the overall budget and think, are we okay with paying a lot for someone who hasn't started? Or is it okay for us to cut loss at some point?
And so when you're talking about sort of budget constraints or managing the budget, is that are you looking at total spend? So immigration programs should only cost our company X and you're managing keeping it in that box? Or is the goal to say we have this estimate based on our numbers, and if we're having a hiring spree, the budget expands because we're bringing on more H-1B transfers or transferring folks from abroad? What are some of those goals? To keep it in a box or to sort of manage per employee spend? Or is that still in discussion? Just curious what the trends are looking like here.
We don't put a limit on it.
Okay.
I think it's also based on the company's performance, right?
Sure.
So I'm lucky enough that my company is doing fine and
Great.
hope that they will continue to do so. So for now, there's no restrictions or any, deep reason about the budget that makes us put a cap on it.
Okay.
It's more of we want to know how we are spending our money.
Got it.
And if there is any reasons why we need to come back and revisit it, then we already have the practice of auditing the expense, knowing how much we spend on each person, knowing how much it may cost per case, and what will happen if we add more people to the same team versus moving somebody internally to that position, for example. So the budget is, I assess only the budget for immigration, but it is a category within the entire HR budget.
Got it.
So in the end of the day, it's more of making sure that the budget for the entire company is what we anticipated in the beginning.
Got it.
And if we need to make some room for other teams, then we know what to do.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like you're looking for, projecting what spend is in 2025, and that if spend goes above, you want to make sure it's like, oh, because we hired on all these new people, like defending each sort of, say, over budget item, or defending like why each dollar matters from a talent management perspective. Is that what I'm
Exactly.
some of those themes?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is like the issue for 2024, certainly, is cost containment. And I'm always really interested to just understand like how companies are defining cost containment, because I think post COVID, companies contracted employees and weren't just throwing silly benefits at them anymore, like sodas and cereals and things like that, that now people are really like trying to defend, like, is this line item necessary and why? And then how that translates into immigration sponsorship is, what benefits are we offering? Is it premium processing? Is it dependence? And defending why or why not to have these different benefits or timing for green card sponsorship. I like sort of picking your brain on that. Yeah. Any other thoughts on cost containment or those priorities?
When I think about budget, I think that it's about how much money we are willing to expense on an employee. But now I learned that I can also think about how much money we are willing to lose to hire someone.
Okay.
So, for example, if I have a candidate that has a lot of situations that on their immigration profile and needs us to expense more money on them, then we will ask ourselves, are we willing to restart the entire recruiting process, which is going to cost us a lot more money?
I see.
Or just let this person start, see what it takes. If they do not meet the expectation after the first few months, then at least we only lose this much money versus doing the entire process again. So that's also something that goes behind budget as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that sometimes feels like invisible, right? Restarting recruitment, because that invisible number is like the time, and then restarting engaging recruitment teams, which has a cost to it. Yeah, great point. That hasn't come up before.
Yes, it costs a lot of money. It's a surprising high number.
Interesting. Okay, cool. I want to pick your brain more about that in another cost containment episode when you come back on. But moving into the communication, in one of our catch-up calls, you mentioned you have initiated a sort of training program for employees and managers about the green card sponsorship and kind of educating them. So can you tell me a little bit about what you did there and how that training has been successful within your global mobility program?
So one of the lessons learned when I started in the in-house role is everyone in the company have very different level of understanding about immigration. Things that I may consider like obvious, like for example, if you don't have a U.S. passport or a U.S. birth certificate, then I will immediately ask myself, okay, what kind of document can you show me to make sure that you have the work authorization? A lot of people don't think that way. And so I realized very, very early on that there needs to be a training across the board. It doesn't have to be like an intensive training, but it's just like sometimes at a team meeting, I could just at this point here and there to make people know a little bit about the very basic things as HR, what we should know about looking at someone's document, for example. And so in working with more complex cases, such as the perm, the green cards, I realized that one, the individual managers who supervise the foreign national employee oftentimes they are excellent managers, but they are not good at understanding anything about immigration, what immigration is looking for.
For sure. Yes.
So the best way is just alleviate that burden from the manager and let the immigration team handle that. So the best option would be to educate the immigration team so that the team understand what to look out for. Even if I am not present in the team, then other people can still know at least what is considered a red flag and what should be flagged in general. And another thing is educating the employee. Like I mentioned earlier, many times when I have a call with an employee and then I realize that, oh, they don't even know that their wife can apply for an EAD now that they have an I-140.
Sure.
Very simple things like that. A lot of people really did not know.
Okay.
And I'm sure that maybe when their case is done, they receive a memo from the law firm explaining everything. But the thing is, a lot of the time people read it, but they don't have a need for anything in that memo yet, so they don't remember. So it's always better to hold the communication in a call with them, making sure that they have the material to read, but also at the same time they're hearing it from somebody telling them that, okay, here are what you can do with this document. Here's what will change in your life now that you have this new visa, for example. And so with that, I started a few training sessions. So I did an immigration overview for my immigration team, just HR, which is like a 1 hour training of how the immigration system works in the US.
Cool.
And I also did a day one CPT session for anyone who is currently an F1 foreign national.
That's awesome.
And the day one CPT thing, I'm sure that there's information online, and
Right.
they can also go back to the university and ask for the information. But what I learned is a lot of the times the university is not as responsive as I anticipated. And so they don't really educate the students on what options they have after they graduate. So day one CPT could be a very good topic for the employees to understand, especially when they have to pay for an education again. So it's just a good
Totally.
learning opportunity for them to plan ahead if they want to, go back and do CPT after their current OPT expires, for example.
Expires. Yeah. No, I mean, and hearing that early on in their F1 cycle is good because, again, with unpredictable and low H-1B registration lottery selections, just having them hear that in their first year of OPT is great because then they know, okay, there's this Band-Aid option of CPT, or just being aware of it because, yeah, occasionally I'll have these calls with foreign nationals that are just like, well, what are my options? And you're like, well, really not much. And so even just planting the seed, even if they don't need the CPT the first year, just having them aware of it in a way that you're giving them quality information, because God knows you can find anything on a blog or Reddit or whatever channel of the internet, that then you're having to almost rebut that. But if you're sort of playing the seed of like, here's this research information, this is what you should start from and have conversations. That's amazing.
Exactly. And I think that, doing all of those conversations in advance proactively
Yeah.
would save me
Yeah,
a
totally.
lot more time down the
Totally.
road.
Yes.
Because, like at random times, I will receive a message about, from an employee saying that, oh, I just read this thread from Twitter saying that this person do this and that, and they got things approved. And I'm just like, I don't trust everything you read from the internet.
Yeah.
And a lot of people may have very similar reactions when they are waiting for something anyway. So, I mean, I cannot stop them from going on Google and search for random things and random advice. And a lot of that is helpful because I still Google in my daily job. I still have to double check myself, but at
Sure.
least I know that what I can filter out
Right.
versus taking in everything that I can see. And I also want to add that one of my favorite things about my current employer is they allow me to be really proactive in my work.
Great.
So I can tell them that I want to do a training about immigration, but if they are not willing to listen on, then who am I talking with, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, these team members are like really excellent at like being great listeners, and they are also very curious about things that they do not work with at all, but still allow me an opportunity to give them a training and see what questions as an immigration outsider they may have so that I can plan the next step proactively for the entire company.
That's amazing. Yeah, that they're using it as a learning experience to hear about immigration, and then you're kind of using it as a feedback session about like, well, if I presented it this way and they still don't understand how I explained XYZ, you'll go back, reiterate, create an FAQ or whatever. Is that what I'm hearing? That you kind of have this like great learning, curious
Yes,
platform?
exactly. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. In the beginning, I thought that my training session that I planned is going to be extremely boring because I mean, you because you work with me at the previous place, and you know that we don't do a lot of communications leading. But now in my current role, I do have to do that, and I was very surprised at the feedback I received after I tell them everything I know about immigration at a very high level. The feedback is often like, "This has been really helpful. Like, I feel smarter." Like, that's the best
That
feedback
is
I
the
could
best
receive.
feedback. And give yourself some credit. I think you have a very good sense of humor. You have a very dry sense of humor that resonates with a lot of people. So you deliver a message very well and that you know your stuff. And so the combination of the two is you can be pretty concise and funny delivering HOB jokes or, well, not jokes, but material and make it light and interesting for people. How lucky for ISN to have you delivering their content and supporting their foreign nationals.
Thank you.
I think last question in this section is, what's your primary challenge in managing your corporate immigration program? So, this is kind of a big, broad question. You can kind of take it anywhere, but what's the challenge you're facing these days?
I think that like we talked about earlier is the the budget decisions, but the main driver behind it, I think, is because of how the perm process is taking so long.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
uh, yeah, in the beginning, I make quarterly email updates about case status for perms, and then I realized that, oh my god, these perms are taking like over a year or two. Like, you know, what's the point of me reminding these people that their case is still pending from last year? So,
Yeah. Depressing.
so yeah, it's like a really depressing reminder that your case is like still in a queue somewhere. So the main challenge for all the decisions that the corporate has to make, I think, is because how long the process takes from the agencies. And so the Department of Labor takes incredibly long, and USCIS
Not much better.
processing time is unpredictable.
Yeah.
We have cases that we filed last year, pending for over 7 months, no feedback. And now, this time of the year, we have cases that are approved within a month under regular processing. So it's incredibly
Wild. Yeah.
unpredictable. And it's also very hard for me to give them an estimate on the timeline on what to expect the next step after the case is filed, because after that, it's pretty much a waiting game. And I would often tell people that, hey, if you have any travel plan or if you have any concern about the timeline, we can connect one off. But the timeline is unpredictable. And I want to give you that heads up at the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you're reiterating some common pain points we see from our benchmarking, which is definitely cost containment, budgeting, projecting budgets in light of increased filing fees, as well as perm processing times. And these are things you can't control, these government agencies in adjudicating things faster, especially the DOL. Yeah, I mean, it's not looking like it's going to get any better unless DOL gets some immense new funding grant to hire all these new officers to process perm. So that's depressing. But it sounds like maybe what you're doing is by focusing on the robust extension reporting and timeline reporting, you're going to be initiating these perm cases just sooner. Is that part of that initiative to
Yeah.
just start it sooner and be like, hey, it's going to take forever, but we're going to
Yes.
start it sooner?
I have that report in the background as we speak.
Yeah.
So,
Like
so
literally
that's
always on.
the yeah, like that is something that we have to work on because the budget for perm is way more than doing a simple H-1B transfer,
Right.
right? So the timeline for perm and also the for every stage in the perm, it takes so much time, but it's not as forgiving if we don't receive a favorable decision.
Right.
So that means that it could be a waiting period, and we'll be done with it. Like, we know that there's going to be a result in the end after 2 years of the entire perm process. But if we missed one step, then that may add another 6 months,
Totally.
another 8 months to the entire wait time. So the overall time frame, a safe time frame, is really unpredictable and also very unrealistic for the company to decide. So all I can do is just try my best and then and make sure that I have a group of expiring people within the time range that I know is reasonable for now.
Totally. Yeah. You're within your best estimates of how things are going.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're giving robust support and advocating for the best possible setups for your foreign national employees, which is amazing and not a surprise given the work I know that you to do. If you'll humor me, I've created a few scenarios for you to offer your expertise for hypothetical anonymized situations for you to kind of opine on. Cool if I ask you a few questions?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so
Sure.
these are
Please do.
anonymized hypotheticals we've created for Minnie to opine on. So this is not related to her program. So the situation and scenario one here is an immigration manager is struggling with the responsiveness and reliability of their current immigration and mobility vendor. The vendor's delays and errors have caused several cases to slip, leading to frustration among hiring managers and company leadership. So this is a manufacturing company. This immigration manager has 8 years of experience. There's 2 people on her team managing a U.S. foreign national population of 300. The question for Minnie, though, about this program is, how would you advise this immigration manager to assess the partnership with their vendor and ensure accountability and improvements? How would you advise the immigration manager to support their internal stakeholders during this kind of turbulence?
I hear the key word there is the struggling with responsiveness and reliability. One thing you learn is people who are not as responsive via email are often very good experts when you get a chance to have a call with them.
Good point.
So, so if they don't reply to your email, just send a call invite and give them all of your questions in one session.
That's a great
And
point. And then if you have a
yeah,
frustrated foreign national employee, get them on a call. So to your point, like they can ask all their questions at one time, get it all out. And yeah, human to human, probably get a better result for sure.
yes, exactly. A call is oftentimes a lot better than just doing an email. My general rule of thumb is if any discussions that I cannot write a summary email on in less than 15 minutes, possibly it would be better to do a call about that.
Love that.
Yeah. And if there's an issue that we know that is from the vendor side, then I would also curious to ask what is going on on their team.
Totally.
Uh, are they also understaffed, or do they need any additional support, or is it just like the seasonal workload that is happening and that's why they are not as responsive?
Totally. Yeah. Get some understanding or context. And can you help in that partnership? For sure.
Yeah. And then once I have that understanding, then I would want to see what options does the business have, given this is the vendor situation, this is the request from our employees, then what options do we have? And then make all of that list, pros and cons for every option, consider the timeline and the cost for each option. And then at least now we have a list of what choices we can make.
Good call. Okay.
Yeah.
Scenario 2, last one. The senior mobility manager is responsible for overseeing the corporate mobility program and must find ways to optimize the budget. The companies experience rapid growth, putting additional strain on the mobility budget. The senior mobility manager has determined that the best way to optimize the company's budget is to eliminate premium processing benefits for all petitions that do not have a business requirement for premium processing. So there's a healthcare company that has previously offered premium processing, but because of these budgetary constraints, is introducing a policy for only business necessity premium processing. The question here is, what strategies would you suggest to the senior mobility manager to effectively manage the new policy rollout? This would be a tough one.
Our company actually does not cover premium processing
Okay.
Unless there is a business need.
Okay.
So this is something that we already did.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that for any kind of major changes to the benefits policy like this, it's always better for the company to have a formal meeting about that. It doesn't have to be like a meeting just about immigration. It could be, all hands meeting. And then now we want to announce that we no longer offer premium processing benefits to these case types, for example. But I think that it's also important to let the employee know that they can still pay out of pocket.
Right.
And the reason that we choose premium processing is because it doesn't impact the work authorization. And it will only impact your case if you have a need to travel immediately. So it would at least narrow down the group of employees who think that they are being impacted. And if they need to do premium processing, then they know that they can take the situation and pay it out of pocket.
And are you, okay, so I like the idea of like this all hands meeting to kind of put it out there as you're announcing the policy rollout. Are you also putting this in an immigration policy and releasing that policy to any company employee?
Yeah, definitely. This sounds like a change in a policy.
Yeah. Yes.
And I don't think it sounds like a temporary measure. So if it's a change in a policy, then that policy is going to be updated and will be sent out after the meeting. But I think that a conversation before sending that out is always better than just here we go. Like if there's a change, we no longer pay for $2,800 at $5. I think that the point here is just make sure that there's a communication directly from management from the company, and make sure that the employees know what options they have if they still want to pursue premium processing.
Totally. I bring this up because I think a number of companies, in an effort to cost contain, are taking a serious look at their premium processing benefits. It's the, low hanging fruit in which if you're looking to cut spend, premium processing isn't always necessary, especially if your foreign nationals are not required to travel internationally for business. So long as you're timely filing extensions, things like that, they're very manageable without premium processing. And so this is an issue I think we're going to see a lot of companies roll out in 2025. I haven't seen companies change their policy mid-year yet, but a lot of companies are looking to reduce premium processing benefits, knowing that their employees can pay out of pocket. So I think this is a question that you opined on that folks will be rolling out in 2025 that mobility managers are considering introducing.
Definitely. I think that the first thing, if any business ever need to cut in terms of immigration budget, would be the premium processing fees, because it's not required. And also a lot of times people do not need to travel that often, so they can wait. And there's really no need to have an expedited approval notice if they don't have the need to use it.
Totally. So that's the end of all my formal questions, but do you have any concluding thoughts you'd like to leave us on the business immigration benchmark? No pressure.
I do not have a whole lot of closing statements for the podcast.
You've given
Obviously,
us.
this is my first time being a guest at a podcast, so I don't know what else I could do to entertain the audience right now.
A song, a dance. You've given us a lot of gems. Thanks for sharing your story about your interaction at the border when you were 17. That's going to stick with me. And your pledge for kindness certainly is something I've known about you for some time and makes a lot of sense. So thanks for sharing that like origin story with me and our listeners. It's been a real pleasure, Minnie, to chat with you here today.
Thank you, Laura, for inviting me. And thanks so much for having me at your podcast.
You're welcome. We'll see y'all next week.